Thalie Martini, CEO of Breast Cancer UK, and welcome to the Be Well podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to a 21st century pioneer, an absolute environmental game changer. Now, believe it or not, there was a time not so long ago when we all believed that plastics, in particular those handy disposable plastics, were the best thing since sliced bread. So what's incredible about my guest today is that her simple idea has helped to transform how we now think about and respond to single-use plastics. From the moment she shared with her colleagues that she was going to go plastic-free for a whole month, she set the wheels in motion for what has now become a global movement that has influenced how the public, how businesses and governments around the world respond to one of our greatest environmental threats. Yes, my guest today is none other than the founder of Plastic Free July. And at Breast Cancer UK, we've been avid supporters of Plastic Free July for very good reason. We know that many harmful chemicals are present in plastics that are used in everyday products, and these can interfere with our hormones, and in doing so may actually increase our risk of diseases such as breast cancer. So this is a really important conversation for us, not just because of the future of the health of our planet, but also the future of our health and that of future generations. So I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Rebecca Prince-Ruiz. I'm so pleased you could join us today, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So, Rebecca...
thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, I'm really thrilled to be able to talk to you. And as I said, we've been supporters of Plastic Free July for some time now. And, you know, the movement itself has become a global movement, a lot like Breast Cancer Awareness Month, Veganuary, and also like Movember. But there is something about this movement that has a greater sense of urgency. And, you know, I was really interested to read in your 2020 book, which I highly recommend, Plastic Free. You state in this book that plastics represent the first time in our history that we have used a resource en masse for a single occasion. And so for me, this is a good place to start the conversation. So, Rebecca, can you tell me what the problem was that you initially saw that prompted you to start your plastic-free movement?
So I think the important thing before I tell you that is to say, like, I didn't set out to start a movement. I just set out, I saw this problem. I knew it was my problem, and I just set out to change myself and invited others to come along. And I think that it's really important that we understand that change has got to start with from ourselves. So for me, I visited a waste facility. I visited, I'm very fortunate where I live to have my recycling picked up from my curb every fortnight, and I went to the facility where that recycling is sorted. We put we have mixed recycling here in Walialla, Fremantle, in Western Australia, and so we put our paper, plastic, metal and glass all into the same bin. It gets collected. And look, I'd been to a landfill before. I knew what that was like, but I felt really good about recycling. And look, recycling's important. But when I went to that facility, first of all, I was blown away by just the sheer volume. You know, I knew what my waste looked like, but when I saw it with my neighbours and everyone in my street and my suburb, I was just blown away by the volume, and then seeing the complex process to sort it into the different material types, into the different types of plastic, bale it up and send it for recycling, which is absolutely what we should be doing. I suddenly realised that I just shifted from feeling good about filling that bin to thinking, how can I actually put less in there? Going back to your prevention piece, you know, and when I went to put out my recycling that night, I think it was a yogurt container, I had it in my hand and I looked at it and I thought, I know where this is going to go. This is my plastic. What could I do differently? And it just grew from there.
Wow, incredible. And you said that you weren't setting out to start a movement, but that is actually what happened. And can you explain to us a bit how you moved from kind of right, I want to encourage my friends and people around me to kind of do this with me, to kind of change how we think about plastic. What were the things that you started to do that got more interest around you? into Plastic Free July?
So at the time, and you did a great job in your intro, single use wasn't even a term. So sure, there were scientists that had been discovering plastics in our environment for some time, but it wasn't part of this plastic pollution issue. The waste issue wasn't part of our conversation like it is now. And so really the way that it did grow was me deciding that I didn't want to do it by myself. I wanted to invite others. I was working for local government authority at the time. I invited my colleagues. We had a great network of volunteers, so a few of us decided we'd give it a try. And I thought I was pretty good. I was working in sustainability education. I thought, I've got this. I don't buy bottled water. I take my own bag. But suddenly I realised, oh, my gosh, it's everywhere. I remember going shopping and it was like, I got bananas. I've got a box of pasta, some mushrooms, a few avocados, and I don't know how I'm going to feed my family for this month. Yeah. It was...
because everything else was in plastic.
It was hard, but what we found by doing it, everything was in plastic. And it was like I had these blinkers taken off and suddenly realised it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. And I had to stop shopping at the big supermarket, which I kind of felt okay about. It did take me longer because I went to the farmer's market. I went with my Tupperware container to the fish shop. I just started shopping at the bulk food store, and I'm very fortunate that I have a lot of those options near me. So I think one of the things about plastic is it was just kind of invisible almost, like it was convenient, it was cheap, it was often free, those plastic bags. I remember the first time I was thinking, I'm going to get a drink. I've got to ask for no straw, and I'm a bit shy. So I was like, do you mind if I was just wondering if I could have no straw? And then I got my drink back and it was like, I had 2 straws in it. And, then we had to, the next time I said, look, I'm doing this plastic free challenge, and we just helped each other. And then we shared ideas. Where do you buy pasta? And someone said, well, this store sells it in bulk, or this brand comes in a cardboard box, or here's my Nonna's secret recipe. Don't share it with anyone else. Or, where do you get milk in a glass bottle? And, we couldn't do everything, but it felt really good about making some changes. And then when you would, it's a very visible thing, the plastic issue. So as we were using and creating less waste, there was less in our bins. We'd, over the month, formed some new habits, which felt good. And, month is quite a good time to try and embed a new habit or practice into our lives. And people started to share it when they were, taking their reusable cup to get a coffee, or having conversations around the dinner table or in their workplace. And it really grew by word of mouth. Yeah. So we had 40 people in that first year, and then there was 400 the next year. Wow. And 4,000, and it just...
That's incredible.
Really, it's grassroots. It wasn't an advertising budget.
Yeah. It's really powerful how that word of mouth, leading by example, can have this kind of effect of, spreading rather quickly year on year. And I was really interested to read in your book that, how do we motivate people to kind of approach something which appears really quite challenging, like ditching plastic? And, we've got so many problems that we have to contend with. How do we, prioritise getting rid of plastic? And what was really interesting about what you came up with in the early stages of the Plastic Free July campaign was this simple idea called the top 4, and that kind of made it a bit more achievable to people. So I'd be keen to hear more about this idea around the top 4 and how that helped to get more people on board.
Yeah, so the top 4 was an idea we came up with quite early on. It was really because, as I said, single-use plastic wasn't understood like it is now. Like, what does that even mean? And so we decided, and we wanted to make it easy. It wasn't, and we didn't want to make people feel guilty or people feel bad. So the top 4 were plastic bags, water bottles, straws, and the coffee cups, either plastic coffee cups or just paper cups lined with plastics and the plastic lid. Like, here are these common 4 items that it doesn't have to cost the earth. You can just say no. You can use what you have, what you already have. You can ask for no straw, take your own reusable one, whatever it was. Just pick one of those and try it for a day, try it for a week, try it for a month. And it was this way of visualising the solutions. And right from the outset, we didn't focus on the problem. Not that, that there's a role for education, but we were always very focused on solutions and sharing solutions, sharing ideas, and also sharing stories about what other people do, because the plastics that I encounter and the alternatives available for me might not be the same as others. So it really was about lots of people making small changes and sharing those and encouraging other people to join in.
Yeah, and by the sounds of it, that really helped kickstart the whole campaign. One of the top 4s that we at Breast Cancer UK are particularly keen to highlight is the single-use plastic water bottles. Now, our concern, but it's the same with lots of other plastics, but in particular with these water bottles, is that often they contain endocrine disrupting chemicals, otherwise known as EDCs, such as bisphenols, and bisphenols may increase our risk of breast cancer as well as lots of other diseases. So we encourage people to ditch the plastic and instead to reuse metal drinking bottles so they can reduce their exposure. But actually, what's really interesting, again, that you point out in your book is that there's another very logical reason to stop buying water in plastic bottles, and that's that many countries have ready access to free and clean drinking water. So why has the sale of bottled drinking water been so successful? What explains it?
That's marketing. There's been a lot of money spent on a lot of clever marketing, and in some instances, in some communities, bottled water is the only option, but that shouldn't be an excuse, because we should be investing in having free drinking water available for everybody. We've been sold this myth, and I think one of the ironies is as we're becoming more health conscious, avoiding soda and other carbonated, sugared beverages, perhaps hopefully drinking a bit less alcohol, we're switching to water. And I think we've also been just sold this myth that we have to constantly hydrate, that we always need to be carrying it around with us. Living in Australia, I always keep a water bottle in my work bag and in my car, but we can go for an hour without having a glass of water, but it's almost become this cultural thing of carrying that water bottle around with us. And so that's why that was one of our top 4. And the prompt, it wasn't go out and buy this season's latest fancy reusable water bottle, which, great, go buy an insulated bottle if you don't have one. It was actually just use the one that you've got. Many of us have multiple water bottles at home, or we can repurpose a Passata bottle if we, or a glass bottle if we don't, if transport's not an issue. So it's about, just that rethinking, that reusing, and just making some conscious decisions and, not spending the money on something that many of us often don't need to buy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that whole kind of shift towards thinking differently and changing our behaviours, I suppose it's one of the things that both of our charities have in common is that we support people to make these small changes to their lifestyle. So in our case, it's to help reduce risk of breast cancer, and in your case is to help reduce plastic waste. But in reality, we know changing our habits and our behaviours is quite complicated, to say the least. What's interesting for me is that one of the things that you did as part of your work in developing your campaign was that you conducted behaviour research. And I'm really interested in finding out what it was that you learned from that research and how that helped to grow your movement as well.
Yeah, that's been just such an interesting and rewarding part. I've learned a lot from, we now work very closely with a behavioural scientist, and, he's the person that taught me about, the importance of sharing ideas, of the importance of sharing solutions, and not focusing on education or making problems too complex or people feeling guilty. So we got a lot of that, by not trying to start a movement or educate other people, by just starting out trying to change ourselves. We got a lot of the principles of behaviour change best practice right from the outset. And now that research that you're referring to, and I'd love to share that link with your audience and to get people to take it, is we conduct this, we call it the Pesky Plastics Quiz. So it's a 5-minute quiz helping people to look at what are the plastics in your everyday life, what are the choices that you're making, and also what are your attitudes, what are your views, what should business and government be doing. So we do that before people do take part in Plastic-Free July. Even if they've done it before, we encourage people to take it in the lead up to July, and then we repeat that survey afterwards so we can measure behaviour change. And also then we do that with the general public so we can track trends. So we know this campaign works. We know that by participating, people are changing behaviours, and that 87% of people continue one or more behaviours after July and have long-term habits. We know they're reducing their waste in the bin. Interestingly, we're actually also measuring increases and improvements in well-being and connectedness to the community, which really struck me, and Colin, our behavioural scientist, talks about that in terms of like being able to live your values and feel good about what you're doing, and also be part of something bigger. And, I told you some of the numbers before. And then when we started doing this global research through the support of our partners, Ipsos, then we discovered that there was 120 million people doing Plastic-Free July. I was still struggling with 1 million people might be doing it. And what that did is it actually even, just knowing those numbers, knowing those, the waste that was being avoided, extrapolating that from a household bin, a household participating to our global audience, really helps people to feel good about the changes that they're making aren't just stopping there, that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And when we make when lots of people make small changes at the same time, that's when business and government notice, and that's when they start to make some of the systemic changes that we obviously need to turn around these wicked problems. And a lot of people say, think, what difference can I make? What difference does my one choice make? Or, I remember my bag on the first day and I got a straw on the second day. But when you see that there's millions and 100 million around the world taking part, it's really powerful. And I think that, seeing the way that not only people have taken it up in their own life, but taken it into their communities, into their workplaces, into their kids' schools, into their friendship groups and networks, is just this real positive, I think, testimony to the power of grassroots change.
Absolutely. And there's that kind of normalisation now of finding alternatives. it feels normal. It doesn't feel, a little bit quirky like it might have when you started out.
Absolutely. Like I can go, I try and support local businesses as much as I can, but I can go to my local big box supermarket now and I can buy a bamboo toothbrush. I can buy, a shampoo bar. Don't get me wrong, it's still like full of single-use plastic packaging, but they wouldn't have made those changes. Our government wouldn't have banned lightweight plastic bags and straws and introduced a beverage container deposit return scheme, which I sure hope you get soon, in the UK, unless people had asked for that change.
Yeah. And as you say, there's so much power in grassroots movements and the impact they can have on, say, how businesses and governments behave, and also, making those changes, those behaviour changes on an individual level can have a huge impact, as you've described. But the reality is that without appropriate regulations, for example, what we can achieve is limited. So I'm interested in knowing, looking at a global perspective, do you think that international lawmakers and businesses are doing enough to combat the crisis?
No, I don't. But they need to. And there are some really positive signs. So through the UN, global governments are currently working on a global treaty to end plastic pollution. It's being negotiated as we speak. 2024 is a really important year. Because this treaty it's our best chance at making sure that all countries are participating, but that the businesses that are manufacturing the plastics, the plastic producers, the businesses that are making the packaging, everyone across the entire the word used is life cycle. I have trouble with that word, but across the entire life cycle and across the entire value chain of plastics needs to play a role, and that is really critical. Look, we've had some good success. We've had an increasing number of jurisdictions banning plastic bags and other forms of single-use plastics. Some countries have introduced plastic taxes and other regulatory mechanisms to increase the use of recycled content. Don't get me started. We could talk for hours about that recycling label on all our packaging. The fact is we're not into double digits yet of how much of the plastics we've produced that's been recycled. It is much more expensive than virgin plastics for businesses to use. So they're the kinds of things that need to be tackled through the global treaty. We need strong global rules with that. And it has to happen at that level, and a growing number of countries have a high ambition for the global treaty. It's supported by global citizens. There are, unfortunately, some countries that are largely the oil and gas producing countries, the countries where petrochemical industry have a very low ambition. They want voluntary national action plans. We unfortunately, despite all this good work that citizens have been doing and governments and some businesses, plastic production is increasing. As we shift to renewables, more of fossil fuels are going to be going into plastic. There's more production coming online. So the number one thing that we have to achieve is a decrease in production. Otherwise, it's going to go from plastic bags into plastic whatever. They're going to be making it into some other item, and there's no doubt about the evidence of the environmental impacts. We've got a growing waste issue, and emergingly, as you said, we know the impacts that it's having on human health, not just now, but of future generations, and it's imperative that we take action.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you say, there are some success stories, and the grassroots success stories hopefully will really help to highlight the importance of that. And it seems that that's where our power is as individuals, is to continue to highlight and ourselves take action. So I am really actually interested in those success stories, and you talk a lot about them in your book. Can you share with us and with our listeners some of the stories that have made Plastic Free July such a success? Any stories that come to mind?
Oh, there are so many stories. I feel that's my favourite bit of the work that I do, and people often ask me, doesn't it get you down? And yes, it's a big problem, but for me, I balance that with hearing stories of every day. I read a story of someone or a group somewhere in the world that's making a difference, and it's, that's from 5-year-olds to community groups to cafes to people that have just had a conversation or just. I love hearing the stories in July. This mum emailed us, and it was her first plastic-free July, and her child had turned 1, and they were determined that they were going to try and celebrate their child's birthday during July with no single-use packaging. So they'd borrowed some fabric bunting instead of balloons. They used reusable plates. They gave a paper bag with some dried fruit and a little wooden toy, and they'd really thought they'd taken their own containers to get the catering put in. She'd really done a lot of work to try and live her values, and I was like, oh, it's only you're a young mum, just don't worry. But people really want to change. There's a cafe owner that, but the change always doesn't happen in 1 year. So one of the recent stories I love, there's a woman called Sondi in Bondi, Sydney's famous Bondi Beach, and she's got this little cafe that's single takeaway only. And 1 year for Plastic Free July, she decided she was not going to use any disposable cups. People had to bring their own, or she went to the local charity stores and got a box of second-hand cups. So if you forgot, you could take one of those. And she did that for July. There were some problems. Some customers didn't like it, but by and large, it was embraced. And she had some COVID hiccups, but now this is a really busy cafe, like hundreds of people go there after they've had their swim at Bondi Beach. She's still single-use free. Yeah. There's sometimes cups lining up outside the cafe in the morning. And, I think it was last July or the July before, she, made that a permanent change.
Knowing what the coffee culture is like in Australia, I don't think Australians will let not having a reusable coffee cup get in the way of them getting their coffee. They'll find a way around it, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's everything from stories like that to hearing stories from corporates that are taking on the challenge. We did a coffee cup. We run a coffee cup pledge where we've asked elected officials and business leaders. We had a number of MPs and senators last year pledging to avoid single-use coffee cups. Not many in the UK, mostly in North America and Australia. We'd love to have
work to be done with UK
officials in the UK take part this year, but we had a number of businesses in the UK take part, and it started with their CEO making a pledge and sharing that. So it's just a simple A4 that you print out, sign your name on it, that you're pledging to refuse single-use cups in July, and then they share that through their internal challenges, and then on social media, on LinkedIn, to inspire other business leaders to take part. So we've. I was just reading a story of a community group in Dhaka in Bangladesh that mobilised their community. I think they had a little parade. They made a big banner and they were running workshops and going around the community, sharing alternatives to single-use plastic and spreading that message there. There's a law firm that set up a library of with a system called Returner, so that they had beautiful insulated stainless steel coffee cups and lunch boxes and a little library, and they're all dishwasher proof. So then the staff could just borrow that, take it when they're getting a takeaway lunch, and bring it back and put it in the dishwasher. There's kind of like no one size fits all.
There's so many simple ideas. Once people start to think through, there are so many great ideas, and the fact that you share them can be really, really helpful when people don't really know where to start. I think one of the guiding ethos, which I find really interesting about Plastic Free July and really helpful, is buy what you need, buy to last. And I think that can be really helpful to think about, in context about, what impact that can have on our plastic use. But I think the reality is that for a lot of people, ditching plastic is quite complicated. And for some, it's a simple economic argument. I mean, you mentioned yourself that, you reduced your choices when you were choosing, items that weren't covered in plastic. And also some things, particularly in the UK, can be cheaper when they're in plastic than when they're bought in bulk. So it would be really great to hear from you some tips that you can share with our listeners who are really keen to reduce their plastic, but, are encountering daily kind of problems with doing that.
Yeah. Well, my first tip is just don't be hard on yourself. Do what you can and don't stress about what you can't. It will be my 14th Plastic Free July and I'm still not perfect. Use what you have is so important. It's so important. And look, I totally agree, and it frustrates me, and our supermarkets need to do better and not charge more for things that are loose rather than packaged in plastic. But some simple ideas is use what you have. Use the bag that you have. We get our bread from a local baker. We didn't buy a fancy bread bag. My husband had bought a pair of shoes that came in a lightweight calico bag. That's what we get our bread in. Reusing water bottles, just keeping your reusables handy, keeping your reusables in your work bag. Doing things like doing a menu plan. Look before you go shopping, looking at what's in your fridge, looking what's in your pantry. We waste worldwide 30% of all the food that is grown. Some of that happens in the along the supply chain, but particularly in developed countries, a lot of it happens in the home. So look at and there's some great campaigns like Love Food, Hate Waste that have got recipes and ideas of, roast some veggies, do roasted veggies, or make a soup from last week's produce that might be looking a little wilted. And by using what we have, by shopping first in our pantry, using things up, buying just what we need. Sometimes, and I've done this myself, it's like, I go to the store, I need an avocado for a recipe, but it's cheaper to get 4 that are packaged in plastic. But then a week later I realise I did really only need 1, so the other 3 have become waste. And, this isn't always easy, but, I shifted, even though they come in tins rather than plastic, I've shifted to soaking and making my own chickpeas and pulses. I cook them in a pressure cooker. It's cheaper to buy them in bulk. I can buy them from a bulk food store, but even if you just bought a plastic bag with them, you can actually cook them up in bulk. I freeze them in a jar, the same size as a tin, as long as you're not filling those up. You're not filling the jar up with liquid before you freeze it. It's safe. So those little tips of, I think starting to learn some of those skills that we used to have, but we lost. If I have bananas that are overripe and I don't want to have a smoothie or make banana bread, I just put them in my freezer with the skin on, and then we'll make them some other time. I always keep a jar with a whole thing of ginger in my freezer. Try and make my own stock, but make it in, bulk. Just those little things that a lot of the times the things that are packaged in plastic are highly processed. They've got a lot of preservatives. They often have ingredients that really aren't that good for our bodies, like palm oil. And one of the interesting, I'm kind of going a bit off.
But actually, it's very relevant. The impact it has on our diet is really relevant. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. By remember one of my kids early on going, "Mum, we don't have any food anymore. We've just got ingredients." It's like, well, actually, ingredients are real food. But interestingly, like what a lot of people say is, is just not trying to do everything, but making some changes is starting to buy more of our cook and buy more of our food. Make more from scratch and use more whole foods and whole ingredients, buying fruit and veggies that are in season, therefore cheaper, and buying local stuff. So rather than buying something that's out of season, packaged in plastic, it's got a lot of food miles, or buy the apples rather than the imported grapes, or buying a whole pumpkin in season rather than a piece packaged in plastic. And then making a soup that we freeze. And people actually, it's really surprised me when we first started. People would often say they feel healthier because they're eating less processed food, less fast food, thinking a bit more about what they're eating rather than just grabbing the processed packaged snack, which is often quite expensive.
Yeah.
As well. And people say they've often lose weight during plastic-free July as well. So no guarantees.
It's really incredible.
But they eat a more healthier diet, which we know. Yeah. And for me, I started this this journey because I wanted to reduce my waste and I wanted to make a difference to the pollution issue. Every year, it's almost every week at the moment, we're learning about the microplastics being found in our food or another part of our bodies, or, the depths of the ocean and the top of Mount Everest. And then those chemical additives that are in plastics that you referred to, many of them are endocrine disruptors. We know about a quarter of the chemicals in plastics are known of high or medium levels of concern. So more and more people are now taking part in doing this because they're concerned about the human health impacts of the food, of having everything packaged in plastic. So it's like this body of evidence is growing. I'm always reluctant to talk about this a lot because it's so alarming.
It is, yeah.
And it's really hard. It shouldn't be hard for us as consumers to buy food which isn't going to harm our bodies and harm future generations. We know these chemicals. We know microplastics are found in our food, in our bodies. We know we're measuring these chemicals of concern in a lot of our foods. It's going to take years for enough research to have been done.
Yes, we know that. We're investing in the research ourselves, and we know how much is needed before we understand it, you know.
And that's why, you know, for me, the more we can just do to reduce our what we're using to, to make, for those of us that have young children or grandchildren or caring for children, look for just alternatives for food, their food that's packaged in those soft plastics, the bath toys and all of the other toys that babies and toddlers inevitably put into their mouths. Look for different alternatives that aren't plastic. It's just those little small steps. And there's some really good information out there that gives people just those small steps to get started.
Yeah, and we echo that entirely. When we, provide information to our supporters, we always emphasise that the small steps actually make a big difference. And it's so interesting to see how one small step in reducing our plastic waste can have an impact on the food that we eat and a positive impact on our health as well, both of which are so important, in order to, in our case, reduce our risk of breast cancer, but, other health problems as well. So I think that's a really positive note for us to finish on. But I do have our Be Well questions that I ask every one of our guests, and I hope you will indulge us. You've done some amazing things, and, it's very difficult to fault how well you live your life. But do you have any guilty pleasures?
Oh, would you promise you don't tell anyone else?
Well, I can't really promise, but...
Look, I really like salt and vinegar crisps. I still buy them occasionally. That's probably my guilty pleasure.
Yeah, who doesn't love salt and vinegar crisps, that's for sure. Now, the other question really is...
They're a hard one to buy without plastic.
They are. I don't think I've ever seen them without plastic. Now, you've accomplished so much that I feel like the next question, I don't know, is maybe not a great question to ask, because I don't think you need to achieve more. But is there anything else that you want to accomplish that's on your bucket list?
Okay, I would really like to learn Spanish. We have a lot of participants in Latin America and in Spain, but Prince-Ruiz is my surname, and the Ruiz, my father's Spanish, but I never grew up speaking Spanish, so I would really like to connect with that part of my heritage.
Oh, well, I hope you do. Sounds like a great challenge, a difficult one, but a great one. And I've got one last question. Is there a book, a film, or a podcast that's inspired you to be well?
The podcast that inspired me to be well in a really broad sense is it's an Australian one, so indulge me. It's on our ABC and it's called Conversations. And weekdays, it's about a 45, 50-minute conversation, and they just get people's human story from all around the world, and they're really beautifully conducted interviews, kind of rather like your approach, very personal. And look, I'm inspired every time I listen to one of those, because when you hear an inspiring story of people making change and people making a difference, it kind of gives me hope that there's good stuff happening around in the world. And I want to be well so I can keep giving back to my community and keep making a difference and leaving the world a better place.
Wow. That's really lovely note to finish on. Now, I know all our listeners will want to find out more about Plastic July and about you, so can you share with us where they can go to get more information?
So just go to our website. If you Google or search Plastic Free July, it'll come up. It's plasticfreejuly.com. You can do the pesky plastics quiz. It's a great place to get started. Take the challenge. It's all on our homepage. We try and share lots of ideas, solutions, stories through there and on our social media. And we love, it's very much a two-way knowledge exchange. So we love hearing stories of what people around the world are doing. So we'd love to get to know your listeners and network as well.
Brilliant.
I'm sure they've got some great ideas that we can learn from.
Yeah, and as you say, it's that sharing of ideas and stories that's so important in keeping the momentum going and giving people a reason to get on board. Thank you so much for your time. We'll make sure that all of the links and the podcasts and everything that you've shared with us, we'll put in the show notes. It's been really lovely talking to you, Rebecca. Thank you so much, and all the best, really, for your continued campaign.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity, and likewise.